Anyway, welcome everybody to the Audit and Governance Committee of the County Council. We have apologies, and those are what exactly?
We have apologies from Councillor Alan Priest and Councillor Ray Theodolou, and Councillor Stephen Hurst is substituting for Councillor Theodolou.
Thanks. Yes, we've already met up again. He's a busy man, Mr. Hurst.
And Councillor Fisher has also just sent his apologies.
Oh, he sent his apologies, has he? Yes. Okay, thanks very much for that. Do we have any special declarations of interest? Right, in that case, we proceed to the minutes of the previous meeting of the 22nd of January. And I'm asking you to approve those minutes as being accurate and appropriate. Could I have an approval? I've got a thumb up from Councillor Hay. That's fine. And do I need a seconder?
No, we panel of.
Can you see a seconder there?
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you. That's fine. That's fine. That's lovely. Right, we move on to the first substantive item, which is the Grant Thornton Progress Report, and we've got Peter Barber who's going to introduce it. Go ahead, Peter, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. I'm joined today by my colleague, Alex Walling, who will be taking over as your engagement lead and appointed auditor with effect from 2021. So this will be my last audit committee. Alex, do you want to just briefly introduce yourself?
Yeah, will do. Thank you, Pete. So as Pete said, my name's Alex Walling. I'm Director at Grant Thornton, like Pete, and I work out of the Bristol office. And I've been doing public sector audit since I left university, which was a long time ago. And I've got a mixed portfolio of local government. So I've had experience of doing upper tier, lower tier, police, fire, and obviously also do NHS audits as well. And I'm looking forward to working with you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. So Chair, I'll take you through the first part of the progress report in respect of 1920, and then I'll pass over to Alex, who will take you through the position with respect to 2021. So if I can refer members of the committee to page 14 of your papers on the left-hand side. Just in terms of 1920, you'll recall that we issued an unqualified opinion on both the council and the pension fund back in November. You'll recall from previous conversations that the value for money conclusion for a number of years now has remained outstanding until we've concluded our work in relation to the energy from waste scheme. You'll also recall at the last audit committee based back in January that our whole government accounts work was outstanding. That was due in December. However, a technical issue with the central system, so nothing to do with the council or ourselves, prevented the updated return from being submitted. A deadline extension was granted to address this technical issue, and that was subsequently resolved, and we did complete our whole government accounts consistency work and signed that off on the 4th of February 2021. So the only issue now outstanding in relation to certifying completion of the 1920 audit is the objection relating to the energy from waste scheme. So just a bit of an update on the energy from waste scheme position. Conscious that at the previous meeting I referenced the fact that our provisional views document was issued in December, the 15th of December, and that was shared with both the council and the objectors. Members of the committee will also recall that both parties were asked for a response to this updated provisional views, and they were given until the 22nd of January 2021 to do so, which just so happened to be the date of our previous meeting of this committee. At that same committee in January, the Executive Director Corporate Resources indicated that the Council had requested an extension to the response deadline to potentially to give the Council a bit more time to consider its response, and that was duly granted on the 26th of January with the deadline extended to the 19th of February. So the latest position is, having received additional representation from both parties by that revised 19th of February deadline, we at GT decided really in the interest of fairness and really to reflect the extensive additional submissions made in response to that provisional views, to share both sets of submissions with the other party. And the aim for this was to provide with both parties with a final opportunity to make any final observations before a decision was reached. And the deadline for those final representations has recently been extended and is now the 14th of April 2021. And obviously, once we do receive those final comments, we will then hopefully be in a position to reach our final conclusion. The only other thing, Chair, I wanted to say in relation to 1920 is reference the annual audit letter that's available on your website that we presented at the previous audit committee meeting. And also just to say that our certification and claims work for 1920 has also been completed. So, Chair, that's my very brief run through of the 1920 positions. Before I hand over to Alex to do 2021, is there any questions that anybody wants me to pick up on any of those points made?
Chair, can I just make a quick comment?
Yes, you may, please.
Yeah, just before kind of Pete signs off, I'd just like to use this opportunity just to kind of thank him and his team for their kind of hard work and, you know, working with us over the last, is it 3 or 4 years, Pete? I'm not sure. It's
3 years.
3 years. That seems longer though. Yeah, so I think as the GCC staff and the Grant Thornton staff have worked really well in that period. And, you know, I just want to thank Pete for his cooperation and, you know, and the hard work of his team. I mean, the last 12 months, obviously, with COVID, like most things, has been extremely. Can people still hear me?
Yes.
We can now, but we lost a bit.
Okay, yeah. So just thanking Pete for his hard work and that of his team. And I said, last 12 months has been extremely challenging, but we were one of only about 50% of councils that did achieve the statutory deadline of getting our audited accounts signed off by the statutory deadline. And that's kind of no mean feat. And that's down to the dedication both of the GCC staff and the Grant Thornton staff, because we had to find new ways of working from home, doing external audit checks was initially very challenging, but we worked through those challenges and we did achieve the deadline. So thanks to Grant Thornton for prioritising us and working with us during that kind of challenging time. So, you know, we wish Pete all the best in his kind of future career in Grant Thornton, and obviously welcome Alex as our new Grant Thornton. So thanks very much, Pete and the team. And please pass that on to kind of other people as well within the team. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you,
Paul. Peter, can I just add my thanks to you as well? We certainly enjoyed the clarity of your presentations, your patience, and I know you've conducted yourself and your team in a very harmonious way, which has often accelerated progress that otherwise might have been difficult. So thank you very much for that.
And thank you, Chair, and thank you, Paul, for your comments. And obviously, to reciprocate, it takes two, doesn't it, to work? You know, we have our respective responsibilities, but I think it's been done in a professional and challenging manner. So thank you for those comments. Terry, is there any other further questions on 1920 before I ask Alex to do 2021?
Colin Hay has his hand up, Chair.
Go ahead, Colin.
Thank you. I just want to go back onto the value for money report that we're all anxiously waiting for. And I have to say, I am increasingly concerned about that. And I know that you said, you know, and it's, sorry, I shouldn't say it's you, your colleague in Grant Thornton is trying to be fair to all parties and allow them time to make comment on the various findings. However, I'm sure it's just coincidence, but the deadlines seem to be dates of our audit committees, which does seem to be quite extraordinary. And the various delays, and you say in fairness to those parties. However, you know, for some, and we don't know what those reports say. but those reports are about how well or otherwise the energy from waste project and procurement and the way in which it is being delivered has been handled by this administration. It is about the delays where something should have been available at the beginning of the year after so long to be delayed so that it's rather conveniently not going to be published until after the elections, I think is really very, very suspicious.
Colin, can I interrupt you there, please? I'm going to be picking up aspects of this VFM issue under the next item, and I'd rather conduct a conversation after I've made my presentation. In the meantime, I'd like to turn over to Alex and ask Alex to complete her work on the Grant Thornton progress report. We'll pick that up later, Colin. Thank you.
Councillor Windsor has raised his hand.
Councillor Windsor-Clive, yes. Okay. If it's on this issue, I'm going to ask you to defer it until later.
Well, only that, actually, Chair, I understand people's consternation here, but actually we've been told we can't discuss it until we've got the reports. We can't discuss unpublished reports. I believe you've taken advice. I mean, we're about to do the code of conduct at the end of this. I understand frustration, but if the auditors are saying we've got to give each side time, I think it would be wrong to discuss this.
We're not discussing the report. I shall make it clear in my presentation. We're not discussing the report because we haven't received it. I hope we'll be discussing the issues around the report and the Audit and Governance Committee's role. That's what I want to talk about. So I'm going to stop conversation now and turn over to Alex. Please continue your Grant Thornton report. There are a couple of quite interesting emerging issues, I understand.
Thank you, Chair. After all your thanks to Pete, I feel like I've got large shoes to fill, so bear with me. In terms of carrying on with the progress report, in terms of thinking about 2021, then what we do is set out in the progress report on page 15 of the papers the deliverables in terms of what we as the external auditor will be delivering to you under the auditing standards, both the council and the pension fund. Just as a bit of an update, we mentioned on there about the deadlines of the accounts this year. I understand the accounts and audit regs have now been published, and the expectation is that clients will be putting their audited accounts on their websites by the end of September. So that's what we'll obviously be working to. And I also understand that the inspection period starts, I think it's the beginning of August. So that's obviously something that, you know, officers I'm sure are aware of. Moving over then in terms of the next couple of pages, 16 and 17. So we talk a bit there about materiality and also some significant risks for both the county and the pension fund. And we've set out the areas that we're expecting to be significant risks for 2021. And broadly, it's very similar to risks that you had in previous years. Obviously, at the moment, what we're doing is we're going through the planning stage. So we're doing some early work. And obviously, once we've identified what significant risks there are for both the council and also the pension fund, we'll be bringing that to you as part of our audit plan. And obviously, that will then focus our work in terms of what we need to do for the accounts audit later in the year. Moving over to page 18 then and page 19, we've set out there our value for money arrangements. You may be aware that the National Audit Office amended their Code of Audit Practice, and that started from April 2020. So that kicks in really for the 2021 audit year. And there's some changes predominantly around the value for money arrangements work that we have to do, and we've set that out in this report. Ostensibly, we're looking at three areas. So we've got financial sustainability, we've got what I call the 3 E's: improving economy, efficiency and effectiveness, and also governance. So they're quite similar areas to areas that we've covered in the past, but the expectation is that whereas in the past we've just honed in on significant risks, now we'll be looking at all of those 3 areas and doing a commentary across those areas to form to come up with the commentary that we feed back to you later on in the year. The overall conclusion has gone. That was, you recall, that was a binary. It was either qualified or unqualified. That was obviously quite contentious in some areas. So the NAO have moved away from that. So we'll be just doing this commentary and also highlighting any particular areas that may result in particular weaknesses and where we need to make recommendations. And on page 19, we talk about the different types of recommendations that we may be bringing to you. As I say, we're doing the initial planning work at the moment, and part of that will be looking at the value for money arrangements. And as part of the audit plan, which we'll bring to you, hopefully at the next audit committee, that will actually also highlight any VFM significant weaknesses that we perhaps need to look at in more detail over and above that commentary, that baseline assessment that we actually need to do. On page 20, we talk about, and 21, we talk about the revised auditing standard around estimates. And you're probably thinking, well, that's all very interesting, but what's that mean for us? Well, there's an expectation that we will be talking to management much more about what estimates have you got in your accounts, the significant ones, obviously not the more minor ones, and actually how have you come to those estimates, and actually also looking to you as those charged with governance to ask you about, well, how have you challenged management? Are you comfortable with how management have come up with those estimates in the accounts? And 2 key estimates, obviously, in the accounts are around PPE valuations and also the pensions valuations as well. You know, big numbers, and probably areas that historically officers have tended to use external advisors in those particular areas, and so almost taken their word for, if they've said the figure is X, they've put that in the accounts. And what this auditing standard is asking us to do is challenge management more about, how are you happy with those figures? Do they seem reasonable? Are they what you expect? And obviously also looking to yourselves, as I say, as those charged with governance, as to what challenge you've actually brought to management to actually see whether those estimates are actually reasonable. We've actually pulled together a paper which we've shared with officers already in this particular area, asking them to come back on estimates and how they've come up with the estimates and how they do challenge those areas. And once we get that information back, we will be sharing it with you as those charged with governance so that you can see sight of that as well. In terms of the rest of the document, it's a sector update. I wasn't necessarily going to talk about the changes in the code of practice. I think I've sort of covered that really in talking around the VFM, but I'm conscious that was a bit of a canter through, and I'm more than happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Alex. Yes, there's not much in the way of progress to report, is there? But those 2 issues, VFM and estimates, are quite interesting because in both cases, governance and governors are referred to. Could you explain how the VFM approach is going to affect governance? And also, do you foresee training required as a result of the paper that is going to be prepared on estimates and how we're going to interrogate the way in which estimates are constructed?
I mean, if I take the first one, which was around governance, obviously governance is one of the areas that, as I say, we've been asked to look at by the NEO in terms of looking at the overall governance arrangements, because that's obviously what we're still continuing to look at, is the overall arrangements. So we will be coming to officers with probably some questions around, you know, what are the governance arrangements of the council and the pension fund? How does it work? You know, perhaps if there's any internal audit work that might be pertinent to it. You may have also done some internal reviews yourself around the governance arrangements, and then just honing in down and, you know, looking at risk registers, things like that, and actually looking at, you know, do the arrangements seem reasonable or not? Have they changed because of COVID? Because I know in a lot of entities, particularly the NHS, some of the governance arrangements have changed quite considerably. So we'll be asking some baseline questions around that to officers to sort of and dig down a little bit more around the governance arrangements per se. And obviously, if we find some areas where we have concerns, we'll be bringing them back to both officers and yourself ultimately in terms of, well, this is what we've seen elsewhere. Perhaps, you know, you might want to think about this, or actually your arrangements are very good and, you know, well done sort of thing. In terms of the second question you asked about estimates, that's a really great question, isn't it? So I don't necessarily see that you might need some training. I think it will be around, obviously, as I say, we've sent a paper to officers to ask them some baseline questions around what significant estimates have you got in the accounts? How have you got to those estimates? Have you considered alternative estimates? Have you challenged the information that you've been given by, you know, perhaps the external valuer or even the internal valuer? And that paper will come back to yourselves. And then I would see it as, and obviously if you have any particular questions, I would see you going to management sort of saying, well, okay, how did you get to those figures? How do they look reasonable? So I'm not sure you necessarily need any training per se. I think it's just about asking those questions around the numbers and sort of, you know, does it look reasonable? Does it hang together? You know, if somebody's just done something on the back of a piece of paper, then the question is that reasonable or not? Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Yes, I might cautiously suggest that when you're under the VFM heading, when you're talking to senior managers about governance arrangements, you actually involve governors at that stage. Yeah, I noticed you slipped out the word ultimately. So we're very much at the end of the line, it seems to me, when it comes to some of these discussions about the role of governors, and I'm not sure that's how it should be. So I just make a note of that point.
That's fine, thank you, yeah.
Sorry, Nigel.
Okay. Is there anybody else?
Nigel, sorry, Stephen Mawson has his hand up and so does Councillor Parsons.
Stephen first.
Sorry, Steve. Really, it makes me feel 18 again when I'm calling Stephen.
Well, I am old enough to be your grandfather, Steve. Anyway, so
yeah. Particularly on the VFM changes, I think I welcome the changes. I agree with Alex really that some of the hard and fast, you pass or you fail, you know, you're non-qualified or you're qualified, didn't really get into the depth of what happens on value for money and all the different activities that take place on value for money and all the different reporting regimes that we go through on value for money. And in some cases, so for example, the children's social care situation where they're an intervention is an automatic qualification, or you automatically score poorly on value for money because back in 2017 you still haven't been re-inspected. So I think I'm hoping that doesn't automatically qualify again. It might give you one of the recommendations, but it doesn't necessarily automatically qualify you again. So I welcome the changes, and we're looking forward to working through the process with GT going forward.
Yeah, thank you. I suspect Sean will probably agree with you. Go ahead, Sean, please. Councillor Parsons.
No, I would agree with that. Mine actually was I can't fully understand why you mentioned the pension fund and all of that area several times. Yes, it's huge sums of money, but we've already had put in recent years as a pension board that oversees the work of the pension committee, and of course we then have a representative on the supervisory board done in the Brunel partnership. So I'm just interested in principle why you feel that you've got to look at the governance there.
I think that is a good question. I think to be honest, we'll probably be looking more at the governance arrangements in the county council itself. Obviously, as part of the council work that we do around the pension fund, obviously we have to have a view on the overall governance arrangements as part in order to be able to give that overall opinion on the accounts themselves. But I think that is a fair challenge. That's probably one that we will look at as to what other arrangements there are in place that we can actually already rely on.
Sorry.
Thank you. I see Paul's got his hand up. Go ahead, Paul Blacker.
Yeah, I was just going to make a similar point to Councillor Parton, just on the thing about challenging estimates. You know, one of the big ones that we've spoken about was obviously the valuation of the pension fund. That's one of the big estimates we do make. But obviously, you know, we have the actuaries, and as officer level, we do challenge the actuaries. And also at member level, we challenge the actuaries at the pension committee. And as Councillor Parsons mentioned, we've got the pension board as well that oversee that. And also we have an independent investment advisor. So it's really just to give some assurance to councillors that although it's now a new audit requirement for external audit, I feel pretty confident that we have got a pretty robust systems in place already for challenging those estimates. So when they do that audit, you know, we have got those processes in place. There's always room for improvement, but it's a new audit requirement for external audit. But I'm pretty confident that we have got processes in place which show that we do robustly challenge those estimates. But it's good that it's now part of the external audit because, as Alex said, they're very large figures, so you know they need to be looked at by external audit. And just a quick comment on the timescale that Alex went through. She noted that there has been a slip in the statutory deadlines for completing the work. Internally, we're still aiming to get our draft set of accounts completed by May, which was the old deadline. Technically, we have got a couple more months to do that, but we're still working internally to get the draft accounts ready and completed and loaded on our website by end of May, beginning of June. And we know we have got some flexibility in that, but we've got a timetable and we're still aiming to do that so that everything's ready for when external audit come in.
Thank you, colleagues. I can't see anybody else with questions, so are we in a position to move on? Looks like it, Andy, doesn't it? Yep. Thanks so much.
Chairman, sorry.
Thank you.
Chairman, sorry to butt in. At what point were you going to raise the issue of the value for money issue with Energy to Waste?
Well, have you looked at the agenda?
Yeah, I'm just asking where you would.
Agenda item 5 is audit and governance in the independent Grant Thornton report.
Right, sorry.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to take about 10 minutes on this and then I'm going to open it up to questions. Obviously, in moving on to item 5, I don't need to remind councillors that it's almost precisely 4 years since the statement of accounts was challenged by a group called Community R4C in respect of the 213 contract with Abesa Balfour Beatty for the provision of a waste incinerator and its revision in 2016. Grant Thornton agreed to commission a public interest report bearing on the procurement processes undertaken and the value for money aspects of the contracts. As a consequence, the external auditor has been unable to confirm the VFM aspect, as we know, of the County Council's annual accounts to this day. Their colleague John Gregory was instructed to undertake this investigation in what was described at the time as a quasi-judicial function quite separate from their auditing service. Councillors will also recall that this is the first and only time in 4 years that we've been presented with the opportunity to discuss this unique situation. In introducing the subject to this agenda as audit and governance in the independent Grant Thornton report, I intend our focus to be on the former rather than the latter. It's not possible to discuss the report itself because after 4 years, it has not been delivered. But it is my intention to indicate why that is the case and what the consequences of that might be. As far as declarations of interest are concerned, I have, like other members of the committee, been lobbied by the plaintiffs CR4C with their arguments. Along with other members, I was shouted at by Mr. Jarman when he attended this committee nearly 4 years ago. At that point, I stopped reading the organisation statements and only picked up the threads again last December when I had reason to think a report was being prepared for publication. In the meantime, I responded once only to Mr. Jarman's frequent request for a conversation. That was in July 2019 to assure him that yes, the committee would undoubtedly discuss and analyse the report when it was published. I never replied to the intermittent flood of emails I received. I do notice that ever since his personal appearance here, he and his colleagues have consistently referred to the A&G committee in respectful terms. Again, from a personal perspective, you'll appreciate that this issue and the barriers put in the way of discussing it here have acted as a cloud over my period of chairmanship, not helped by the intervention of my predecessor from 2017 to 19. I expressed my frustration on a number of occasions, echoing that of many of my colleagues around this virtual table. And this issue of enforced silence does matter. Every training session on governance I've ever taken part in has stressed the importance of A&G, or in company terms, of the Audit Committee, as being supremely important in overseeing the probity, integrity, and health of the organisation it serves. It's almost like the conscience of the organisation. When it comes to evaluating the effectiveness of an audit committee, the ultimate test is the openness or transparency of its approach, and how it expects this of the component parts of the body it represents. Whether or not it operates in closed session, and it's obviously better that it doesn't, it should expect to leave no stone unturned. I'm afraid we've not been able to rise to that standard. Nor is the issue underlying the appellant's complaint insignificant. Whether or not GCC complied with the then operational procurement laws of the European Union, or whether the estimated cost of cancelling the original contract of £100 million was correct, or whether a proper value for money assessment was made at the time of the contract revision, resulting in an additional possible payment of an extra 163 million of ratepayers' money, these are not negligible matters. As far as I can understand these things, the legality of the procurement arrangements was not something the High Court judge felt able to pronounce on. The Information Commissioner, however, compelled the authority to release most of the UBB contract details in 2017. Previous to that, commercial inconfidence was given as the reason for keeping stum about the contract cost. Next, the judicial review was cited as the reason why we could not discuss the case. Since then, delays in issuing the report have been cited by Grant Thornton as reasons for the continuing silence, although John Gregory did appear once to explain to us the processes being followed. After huge unexplained delays, during which time our counsel did not attempt to explain to us what their position was, we understood that the investigators' provisional views were ready on December the 15th to be presented for comment to the appellants of the council for their comment. A strange procedure this, if it was supposed to be quasi-judicial. Do we imagine that James Hamilton QC, in giving judgment in the case of whether the First Minister for Scotland had broken the ministerial code, would have invited comment from the conflicting parties before delivering judgment? This process sounds more like an arbitration than an independent quasi-judicial process. More quasi than judicial. January 22nd was the deadline set for the parties to comment, the very day of this previous committee's meeting. At which point the authorities' representatives, as you've already been told, asked for a further short extension. Not content with this, which expired towards the end of February, the 19th, I'm now told, GCC then asked for yet a further extension to enable them to supply, as a respected authority informs me, with additional information, with a deadline, wait for it, of today, Thursday, the 25th of March, just in time for PERDA, that sealing of any politically incriminating or otherwise influential actions by local authorities, including public interest reports, but too late for the report to be issued and considered by this committee. Looking at CL4C's representations, which I have done on January the 21st, just before the first deadline for comments, and on January the 25th this year, it is difficult to find any additional information which had not been presented on previous occasions. They are the reworking of earlier arguments. So what was our authority doing presenting new information at this point, given that over 2 years have passed since they dropped the case against the Information Commissioner's disclosure intention? If John Gregory was aware that Audit and Governance met today, the date's long been in the public diary, then it was remiss of him to deny us the opportunity to consider his findings. If he did not know, then it was remiss of his GT colleagues not to inform him. Perhaps our colleagues in the administration reminded him. Perhaps they did not. It's difficult to draw any other conclusion from these events than that our authority has contrived to delay the report's publication until it could be safely protected by the institution of PERDA. And why would GCC wish to prevent the publication of this oh-so-long-awaited report? The disclosure by the Information Commissioner of previously concealed information may have been embarrassing, but it didn't appear particularly to upset the administration. It's unlikely that something similar in 2019 or in the early part of 2020 would have produced more than a tremor. So what is it in this second set of provisional views that drove us, for the GCC is us, whether we like it or not, to manoeuvre so as to delay the report's publication? We can only guess. Not having been presented with a report, we can only guess that it contains substantial criticisms and that these relate to the original concerns about the thoroughness of the value for money assessment of the revised contract of 2016, conducted by the authority with assistance from Ernst Young, and possibly to the reliability of the estimate of the effect of cancelling the 2013 contract and starting again. It may, of course, be that the authority's lobbying, for this is what the process looks like from here, will have diluted the report's provisional views. I hope not for the author's sake, but he would need to be very strong to withstand the sustained pressure he appears to have been subjected to from both sides. Whether or not the incinerator contract proves to be value for money for the Gloucestershire ratepayer cannot, of course, be determined at this point, as the contract runs for 25 years. And as the high initial gate costs reduce, while landfill charges are expected to increase, we shall not see ourselves in credit, compared with other alternatives, for some time to come. Colleagues may remember that I crossed swords with Paul Blacker at this point. This is the irony of ironies. The public interest report can't speculate on this. It concentrates on processes and behaviours. My conclusions are that there needs to be an altogether greater degree of transparency and openness within the authority when it comes to big ticket items such as this, and that the Audit and Governance Committee has been treated with such disrespect that this must diminish its authority, which is not how it should be. That's all I have to say at this point. Colleagues, I invite you to comment and to question. Over to you, Andrea, if you've identified who's got their hands up.
There are no hands raised at this moment in time. If anybody else would like to indicate, Colin has now raised his hand. Colin, over to you.
Chair, I'm sorry if my earlier intervention stole some of your thunder there. And I do wholly agree with your thoughts. And the fact that this is the second time before an election that a major report hasn't been available to the public. Elections are about electors being able to judge the record of any administration and indeed the people who are standing for election and their views. This was such a substantial item that actually pulling it back, delaying the publication could have had could have a major impact on that election. Because as I suspect, the report will be critical. Because why else would there need to be so much time to try and change the wording, the comments from the independent assessor. As I say, this happened with the Children's Services report, which would have been known to the council in terms of their initial feedback at that time. But it wasn't released until after the election. And that could have had quite an impact on how electors made their decisions 4 years ago. And here we are again, And I think it goes to the heart of the culture of this organisation as it's currently sorted, that's what it seeks to do. In my view, a council needs to be open with the public. And that means talking about those good things and those bad things that go on. If the public have a greater understanding, they're actually much more likely to be sympathetic to any organisation that makes mistakes and holds their hands up. But as it is, how can they make proper decisions when information is withheld from them, which is exactly what I see is happening at the moment. If the report gave the council a clean bill of health on this, I'm sure there would not have been any objections or representations made to the independent auditor. So I am extremely worried, and I think it's a very dangerous situation in terms of our democracy that this has been kept from us for quite so long. I'm hugely disappointed.
Thank you. I've got some further comments to make, not about that, but about the process itself. Councillor Winter-Clive has got his hand up. Please go ahead, Will.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, I fully understand the frustration here, but I think we're in great danger of guessing what's in a report without the facts and accusing independent auditors of playing politics here, which is outrageous. I mean, I understand the frustration. I understand Colin will want to say there might be something in here, but it's not published, and so you can make it up. But you are smearing independent auditors, and I think that is wrong. I mean, I understand the frustration. It would be nice to have the report and be able to discuss it openly. It will happen, but I think we've got to leave it to the professionals.
Thanks for that. Can I just reply to your suggestion that I'm smearing the independent auditors? I hugely appreciate the contribution that our independent auditors, as Grant Thornton, make to us. But we were told very early on that this was a quasi-judicial process. Now, if it's a judicial process, like the legal action, the judicial review that was taken, I suppose it's a bit like the jury going out and being told you can't talk about this until the case is over, which is unfortunate. But what we have here is not a judicial process. It hasn't turned out like that at all. It's turned out like a process of badgering and belaboring the so-called independent person with frequent responses, and he's invited it himself. That being the case, then the original instruction that we couldn't talk about it was unfair, unrealistic, and actually diminishes this committee. That's my point. Who's also, has anybody else got their hand up? Not at the moment.
Will, Sam,
but I don't think I'm smearing them. I'm just criticising the process and how it's turned out. Who else? Has anybody else got their hand up?
No, Councillor Windsor-Clive doesn't have his hand up. No, nobody does at this stage.
Nobody, okay. Well, we can leave it there. We've got plenty to get through. I mean, it's fairly routine stuff.
Sorry, Nigel.
Sorry?
We know
Peter,
Nigel.
Peter, yes, Peter's got his hand up. Hello, Peter.
Yeah, Chair, if I may very briefly, just for clarity. In terms of the request for extensions, I think it's just important to emphasise that the request for extensions to the deadlines have been received from both parties during the course of this process. And I think it's also important to put on the record that no decision has been taken as to the final format of our report when it's produced.
I'm going to reply to that actually, because in your report you refer to there's a statement as part of the commentary on VFM that in future organisations should make more use of the public interest procedure. Now, if that's going to happen more frequently, and this was a case of public interest disclosure, then the role of audit committees, if they're going to be muzzled like this, is going to be even further diminished. So, you know, just think on that. I don't think that would be acceptable. I mean, in retrospect, if I had known we'd not be able to comment on this particular scrutiny for 4 years, I mean, all hell would have broken loose. We'd have been absolutely furious. And it's gone on and on, gone on. So there needs to be somebody, the auditors, saying to the people who devise, you know, the National Audit Office or whoever, to say, if you're going to have public interest disclosures, they've got to be done within a specific timetable. It should not be possible for either appellants or defendants, whoever they are, to keep this procedure going indefinitely, because it conceals things from the public, and specifically, it conceals things from members. Officials here, some of them know about what's being happened. They know what submissions have been made by the authority. We don't. There may be 1 or 2 councillors in the know, but the rest of us do not know. We are in complete ignorance. We're like eunuchs in a harem. And that's what's so frustrating.
Sorry, Nigel. Councillor Tipper and Councillor Hay both have their hands up.
Brian, please go ahead.
I've been listening to the debate and on the statements, and frankly, what I'm very confused about is the words subjudice and where all that fits into what has been happening over the last 3 or 4 years. There is no doubt about it that that throughout this period, this particular event has been in the courts, in and out of the courts for most of that time, and therefore subjudice is part of a lawful situation whereby certain things can't be discussed, and therefore there are limitations on what can be said and not said. It's nothing to do with, I can understand perhaps some of the points you've made can be seen as being underhand and that sort of thing. I don't think that's the case. I think you're actually slighting the process and the legal process at Shire Hall, and therefore I really think you ought to take into account those words. Subjudice, and the Google definition of it is under judicial consideration and therefore prohibited from public discussion elsewhere. The cases were still sub judice. I will repeat that for the minutes. Under judicial consideration and therefore prohibited from public discussion elsewhere. I would like to get advice from the experts as to how we fit into that statement and what you're claiming. Thank you.
Brian, I was about to say that was the nicest thing you've ever said to me in the committee, but I don't quite agree with you. You're right about sub judice, but I'm afraid that was only part of the process. That was only part of it. The process instituted 4 years ago was supposed to be like that. It appears to have turned out not to be like that. That's what I'm saying. Anyway, Colin Hay, Councillor Hayes next, please. Go ahead.
With respect, Chair, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I thought you'd finished. With respect, those words were not used, and frankly, I am not an expert in law, but I am aware of some of the things in law, and frankly, sub judice is a very serious situation where if something is in court and the wrong thing is said at the wrong time, basically it is, well, perhaps an offence. I don't know. I'm asking the experts to advise us as to what the situation is with regard to the situation where something is in court at various levels and on various times, and what the situation is with regard to Shire Hall and in particular the Audit and Governance Committee, which I am very proud of to sit on and be part of, and to make sure that the rules are abided by. The code of conduct.
Thank you, Councillor. I think that kind of scrutiny or investigation probably can go on after the election when the Audit and Governance Committee meets again. Colin Hay, please.
Chair, I just wanted to, I've got 2 points. The first one is about the work of the Audit Committee, the work of Audit. An audit is there to try to improve the way in which an organisation operates and clearly point out anything that's kind of fraudulent or whatever. But that doesn't happen too often here, so it's about improvement. If we're going to improve, we should be improving as soon as possible, as soon as issues are raised with us. And I also look at and I know it's different, but I just want to draw attention to serious case reviews, for instance, where an inquiry is looking at how an organisation got into a situation where something very serious happened. And in that case, right at the very start, as the investigation goes through, those learnings are taken up by the organisation. So by the time the serious case review comes around to being published, most of the recommendations have already been implemented. And that's because you don't want to wait until the end of an investigation to make improvements. How can we possibly do that if it takes 4 years for the public interest report to be published? And I understand the bit about it going to court and there are some difficulties there. But in serious case reviews, many of those improvements, many of the recommendations are happening alongside potentially court action. The publication of that may be left, but the serious case review goes on and those learnings take place. And I think we should draw some of those similarities because of the urgency of things, that we can do things in a similar way. The other point I was going to make is that there isn't always a report to council from this committee, and I would hope that for the next council meeting, it'll be a new council, there will be a report of this discussion going to that council meeting.
Well, that's if the next committee decides that, I guess. And if the next chair of the committee, whoever it is, can decide that. But we haven't done that on a regular basis. If there's nobody else, Andy, then I think we ought to move on to the more bread and butter work of this committee, where we do actually call people to account.
Sorry, Chair, I think Councillor Tipper is indicating.
Go ahead, Councillor, as long as you're not repeating your earlier points, which we've thoroughly understood. Thank you.
I'm replying to the previous comment in that the more the serious the case, the more the need for sub judice. And therefore, as I said, whether we're going to get an answer today with regard to the application of sub judice or not, I don't know. But I strongly recommend to the committee that we consider our situation and with regard to sub judice being in place. It is a very overbearing on the statements that have been made this morning, that people and as a body, a corporate body, obeying the law, and frankly, you seem to be making a nonsense of it, and I don't think it is. Sub judice means sub judice. You can't talk about it.
Thank you. I think you've made my point perfectly. We'll move on to item 6. Piyush, are you there? Our new head of internal audit.
Yes, hello, Chair.
Has probably been thoroughly disenchanted by these previous discussions, but never mind. Go ahead and introduce your audit plan, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good morning to you and to the committee. So the first item is the draft audit plan, or item 6, first item for me, which has been prepared in accordance with the Accounts and Audit Regulations 2015 and the Public Sector Internal Audit Standards. So this is the draft audit plan for the financial year 21-22, and the committee chair are asked to approve this plan. If I just take you very quickly through the papers, so there's a preamble about how the plan was put together, and that consisted of a review of the council's risks and extensive consultation with CLT, the senior management, third-party assurance providers, and indeed members, because we've had sort of suggestions raised at the committee itself and more widely by members as well. So the plan covers the breadth of areas, reflecting the full gamut, as it were, of the council's services, and also council-wide reviews and COVID-19 sort of related risk themes. The plan shows the rating scale that committee, I think, is used to, which is a 1 or a 2, and it also includes the justification for an audit's inclusion in the plan. The overall plan is based on a requirement of 1,825 days of audit, which is in line with last year. And just to say that the plan does remain flexible and responsive to the needs of the council at any point in time. So you know, we can include something that requires our attention further down the line. The plan is not, as it were, set in stone. And so we, in the plan, we also provide a breakdown by directorate and also by theme. And I think, just as an aside, I think what I would like to say is that this is potentially most probably the last time that the committee will see the draft plan in this particular format, because we are due to start a review of our planning process later this year. And what we're hoping for is that will see enhancements in how we actually put the plan together and how we also present it to the committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Please, has anybody got any comments or questions to Piyush? Can I say that from my discussions with Piyush, I know he's got a very smart new yard broom there, and we will see some changes, which will, I think, will excite and interest members of the committee. Are there any questions to Piyush at this stage? He's got various other items, as you know. I've got one very small question or suggestion. It's about local flood risk management strategy, for which the County Council is responsible. This particular audit is about some developing the strategy and communicating it. And of course, as I think members of the administration would know, about £2 million is put aside for flood risk management, which of course is a tiny proportion of the amount of money that needs to be spent by the Environment Agency, by Thames Water, by districts on actually dealing with floods. And it's been a rather bad winter in terms of floods, particularly in the Cotswolds and in parts of Gloucester, I understand. But I think there is also an obligation which was brought out by our MP, Clifton Brown, at a recent webinar that he hosted on floods in the Cotswold, that there is a little bit more to this in terms of the GCC's responsibilities. And this is about offering some leadership to those other organisations, not necessarily money. I don't think this is the issue, because the main funders of flood alleviation would be the agencies and the water authorities. But to offer leadership and encourage them, put pressure on them to provide the funds to deal with floods. 2 million won't go anywhere, quite clearly, when there's, when half a town finds its basement flooded. But I think there's scope there for just adding a bit to that particular audit. That's a kind of personal view from our part of Gloucestershire. Just a suggestion. I don't know if anybody else has any suggestions, but Sean Parsons, good. Yeah, Sean knows about this sort of thing because South Surney, part of his division, has also been affected. Please go ahead, Sean.
I tend to agree with you. I think the problem which has existed is that the presumption has been, particularly where main rivers are involved, that the EA will take the lead. And it's quite absolutely apparent, as you all know, Nigel, and I do, that the EA has singularly failed to take the lead. They did do a bit of work just north of Cirencester, for example, I think about 5 years ago, about building a bund or something, or to help with an attenuation system. And I think they worked out it simply wasn't worthwhile doing it. After which they've done absolutely nothing, in my view. And I think what the MP decided to do, to say, well, let's see if GCC can do more, and has asked the GCC to become more involved. But I think it's very tricky for them because the EA, at the end of the day, is a superior body on flooding to the county council, even though the county council is the lead local flood authority. But no, I mean, yes, there is, of course, the joint working party which exists, and I'm glad that the acting that it should come back. I think you went to the last meeting of it in November 2019, by memory.
Yes, yes, I did.
It'll be good to see. It'll be good to see that working again. But it's a valid point, nonetheless.
Thank you.
Sorry, Nigel, Colin Hay
Yes.
to speak, and so is Will Windsor-Clive.
Go ahead, Colin.
Actually, it's a different topic, so if Will is on flooding, I'm quite happy to give way.
Will, are you on flooding?
I am.
Okay, go ahead, Will, please. Yes.
I've got a personal bit here that over Christmas, Newent flooded, and there was a flood defence that failed. And we have an issue which you quite rightly identify, is that you've got the EA, the Severn Trent, the District Council and the County Council, and nobody will take responsibility for who installed that thing. And so what you're bringing up about leadership is very important, because somebody's got to be lead and responsible for this. That what happened in Newent is awful, and we're gonna have to go back and rejig it, and our officers are on it, but nobody's taking a proper lead. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, good. I'm glad we agree on that. Please go ahead, Colin.
Thank you, Chair. It's an issue which I noticed at the last council meeting when I was asking some questions. In terms of internal audit, we look at the risks, we look at our risk register, and the way in which the risk register works is an issue for this committee. Not so much looking at individual risks and how they're being managed, but the way in which risks are managed corporately. And I am quite confident that the senior management team spend their time looking and checking the risk register. But I wondered about political ownership of the risk register and the mitigations. And it seemed to come across in answer to the question that Cabinet, I couldn't get a proper answer on who might take responsibility for specific areas of the risk register that I might expect. Now, it may be how I put the question. It may, but I do think we need to look at how the risk register is dealt with by Cabinet. And I see Rob's hand up, so I don't want to go on too much longer. But just to get that reassurance that there is ownership and that it's active, and that it's clear to the council who in Cabinet is responsible for certain risks. And I think if, I mean, it may well happen, but I think that ought to be clearer and better identified.
Well, thank you. Before Rob comes in, we do actually have the person who should be able to answer that in terms of the current situation, and that's Sean Parsons. You're still there, Sean. I see you're taking a little bit of exercise, quite rightly. Do you want to respond to that, Sean?
No, I'll. Sorry, wait a minute. I think Rob wanted to answer first of all.
Well, okay, that's fine. Rob, you go ahead. We are, yeah. I think it the ownership of the risk register. My understanding is it does not reside with this committee at present. Rob, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, you're correct in that. So this committee obviously has a role in ensuring itself that the risk framework is working effectively. But ultimately, Cabinet is responsible for the management of those risks, and Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee is responsible for scrutinising their management of those risks. And for that reason, at Friday's COSC meeting, they received a presentation outlining the risk management framework and its operation that set out the relative roles and responsibilities both at member level and also officer level. So that would be a useful point of reference if you wanted to understand more about how that is managed. But to answer the specific question, yeah, every item on that corporate risk register is owned by both a director of the council and a cabinet member. At the moment, the risk register itself only lists the director owner, and that's a modification that we're going to make in light of the questions that occurred last week. But it is simply a matter of recording it. The ownership is and always has been clear. It's just that hasn't been in the register itself. And with respect to the question that Councillor Hay asked at Council last week, we've drafted a written answer to that, and if it hasn't already been published, then it certainly will be within the 14-day deadline that Council has set for such things. So an answer is on its way to you, Councillor Hay.
Thank you very much for that. Yes, okay. I don't see any further new questions.
Sorry, Nigel. Sorry, can Sean come back, please? I think.
Yeah, he hasn't indicated, but he's there. Okay, go ahead.
Just very quickly, I think also, and Rob might like to just confirm this. I believe that the senior management team set aside periodically, I mean, 2 or 3 times a year, I think, to specifically review the risk register. Am I right in that, Rob?
Yes, that is correct. It comes to corporate leadership team. I think it's twice a year.
Fine. I think we can proceed to item 7. Piyush, are you still with us? Your progress report, particularly on the areas that I know tend to interest members of this committee of limited assurance. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Chair. So this is the third progress report for 2021 that the committee has received, and it's the second one since the actual internal audit plan was revised back in October last year. So the approach of this report, again, very much follows the processes that committee are used to from last year. And it includes the concluded activities from January and February. So it is a sort of a less heavy, a lighter report than the one the committee received back in January. There is also a counter-fraud team update and an update on additional activities that ARA have undertaken and progressed due to the risks from the impact of COVID-19. There are two limited assurance outcomes, Chair, those being around the Council's use of CCTV and also around expenses and benefits, and these are detailed in the report. And then there are other bits of activity, other bits of assurance relating to internal consultancy activities undertaken by ARA, and in particular a piece of data analytical work that we did with the CCG. Now, for the two limited assurance outcomes, Chair, it is requested that senior management attend the next meeting or a future meeting to respond to the limited assurance outcomes and to also update the committee on the actions that they have undertaken. And the next committee meeting in July, just as a heads up to the committee, this report that you receive at that time will be a little bit heavier, if I can put it that way. And then also, finally, on page 106, you have the whole of the annual plan showing the status of the various audits, Chair.
Thank you. Yes. Does anybody wish to comment or question Piyush as we've got him here? Because you might not have him here in person for quite some time. So grab him while you can. Can I just apologise to the committee that although this is for noting, the previous item, the internal audit plan, is actually for approval. I'm surprised Andy hasn't picked me up on that. So I'm going to ask members of the committee if you agree that we approve the internal audit plan previously presented. Could we have hands waved in the air? Thank you, Andrew. I can see yours and the others. What's it looking like, Andy? I can't see the whole picture at the moment. Are we approving it?
Yep. We are. Yes,
good.
Please.
There you are, Piyush. We've got the approval.
Thank you.
So I don't see any further comments on item 7. So we move on to the limited assurance update. And with a bit of luck, we've got Richard Thorne with us, or coming.
Yes, hello, Chair.
Hello, Richard. Yes, greetings. Welcome to the committee. You've given us, we've already had some understanding and indication of what in the terms of management responses have already been completed. Could you please tell us how much further you've got to go in completing the expectations following the internal audit review?
Yeah, I can confirm that all recommendations have been adopted and all actions have been completed. Do you want an overview of a quick overview of what we've done?
Yes, please.
So it might be helpful to understand that Client Affairs managed the financial affairs of about 500 vulnerable adults in Gloucestershire. 17 of those adults have a vehicle leased through the Motability scheme.
Yes. You've frozen for some reason.
Sorry, Richard, if I
All workers employed by a care agency. And it's our responsibility to make sure that the people driving the vehicles have driver's licenses and understand their obligations. And it was that bit of our work which was considered only offered limited assurance. What we've done since then is reissue and update procedures. We have also updated our paperwork, and we've also been busy verifying the details of the 87 individuals driving our clients' vehicles against the data held by the DVLA. So we've been able to verify that they have driver's licenses, and we're made aware of any endorsements or penalties on their licenses. What we've also done is put together a new driver's declaration, so that outlines their obligations and responsibilities, and each driver has been asked to sign up to that. So that's what we've done, and we said that we would carry out that same checking process every 12 months. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We missed a little bit earlier, but can you just say a little bit about the prepaid cards? I mean, it strikes me that if you've got the wrong person using the card, it is open to abuse. So what checks have you put in place?
Yeah, so our use of prepaid cards is slightly different to other areas of the council. So direct payments, children and adults use those prepaid cards. Our use is slightly different in that the money on these prepaid cards is private client funds. So it's not council funds.
Of course.
The majority of the cards are issued to our clients. It's their own money. So we make the decision about how much money is loaded on the cards, and then it's up to them how they spend it. We do have a very small number, I'd say less than 10%, less than 5% really, of cards issued to third parties. So those are carers or family members managing those cards on behalf of the clients. We have, as I say, updated our procedures, and they are now having to sign up to and record that they've understood their obligations when using those cards.
Thank you. Any other further questions to Richard, as we've got him here?
Our use of those cards was considered satisfactory. It was a new area to us. We've only had them about 12 months, and I think Audit were just looking at how we'd implemented that and what improvement we could make.
Thank you. I think that's it, Richard. Have you completed the risk management template?
Yep, that's been completed. That's gone off to Sally Coates, the risk management advisor, for any comments.
Excellent. Right, thank you very much for your attendance. That's
you.
Very good. Thank you. Now we have item 9, which is GFRS, and we've got Dave Norman here, or we did have.
We do.
Dave still here?
Yes, we've got Councillor Norman, and we've got the Chief Fire Officer, Wayne Boat.
We've got the Chief Fire Officer as well. So what we're interested in knowing is what the Improvement Board has been up to, and what the status is of those those recommendations from following the internal audits, of which there have been many. I think there were about 124 recommendations altogether. I do recall an occasion when the Connections Board was given an even higher figure of recommendations by the Government Office, and they came into being. It's a frightening prospect, but you seem to have made good progress. Who's going to speak first? Is it Dave? Councillor Norman?
Chair, I believe Poya should be leading on this, and then obviously I or the Chief will respond in respect of any direct comments or questions that come from your committee.
If Piesh is happy to do that, please go ahead.
Yes, Chair, thank you for that. So this is the third update report to the committee, following your previous ones at the October 20 and January 21 meetings of the committee. And this follows the same report and approach as previously. And so this report confirms the position as at February 21. And I would say that it reflects a positive direction of travel and the actions of the board and of GFRS in having implemented and verified as having been implemented the previous internal audit recommendations that have been made. And I understand also that the GFRS board have made since this report even more progress in terms of implementing the recommendations. This could be and should be, I'm hoping, your penultimate report on this issue. I think you'll receive a report in July, Chair, or the committee will, and I'm hoping that will be the last report of this nature on the implementation of the GFRS recommendations that you'll receive. But as Andrea said, you have Councillor Norman and the Chief Fire Officer present as well to take any detailed questions. Thank you.
Chair, can I just follow up what was said there?
Of course you may.
Thank you very much. As the Cabinet member responsible for the Fire and Rescue Service, it's quite clear, and I hope members of this committee will note that the journey that the service has been on over the last 18 months has been incredibly challenging, but the outcomes of the work done by the Improvement Board, I think, clearly show to the committee here today that some unbelievable achievements have gone on in the background. Some really positive outcomes have come from that. And can I also link to the fact that, yes, the board has done all that it has in respect of what it needed to do to satisfy ARA, but at the same time, GFRS was under Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabularies and Fire and Rescue Service, where there were some causes of concern raised at the time that the ARA work began. So the pressure on a small fire and rescue service, but a very dedicated team of senior officers, very ably led by our chief, has got us to the position where we are. And I think the committee should clearly accept and make comment about the way in which that work has been undertaken. And all the people who've been involved in this have gone on doing their day job as well. And that day job was further heightened and challenged by the COVID crisis that we are still coming out of now. Without doubt, the work of firefighters and support staff to work on the COVID issues, to work on the ARA comments in respect to the audit, to work on HMI CFRS has been unbelievable. And I hope, Chair, that you will recognise that, because one stream of challenge is enough, but to have three at the same time is a real challenge for people. Very pleasing to report in my 90-minute interview with HMI recently, they've recognised what we've done. They've recognised the fact that we had to look at the work that ARA expected alongside what they expected. They probably felt the balance was slightly too much tipped towards ARA, but I'll leave the chief to make any direct comments on that. But I can do no more than actually give credit to those people within that service who were so low and have now come above the parapet and are now working incredibly hard. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. Wayne, you're here with us. Would you like to say something at the moment? And we've got a couple of questions, people with hands up, but we can respond to them after you've spoken, if you like.
Yes, definitely, Chair. Thank you, and just thank Councillor Norman for his comments and also his leadership as well in supporting us with the progress and the process that we've been through. I think I've said this before, but I think it is worth saying again. I think we've stepped much closer and worked really collaboratively with ARA, and I thank Piyush and his team for their support. We couldn't have, I think, moved at the pace and delivered what we've delivered and achieved what we've achieved without working hand in glove, whilst allowing the ARA team the objectivity that they need to apply, and the independence and scrutiny they need to apply to help us do what we've done. I think you'll be aware, you mentioned there are 124 actions. That's 118 audit recommendations, and then a few of those were split out into smaller actions and tasks that led to 124 actions for GFRS. But importantly, not just GFRS. So if you think about some of the work that's resulted from those audit reports and the recommendations that arose as a result of them, Paul Blacker will be only too aware and happy, I think, although it created work, that, accounting instruction number 5, accounting instruction number 8, those are GCC-wide accounting instructions, and really useful policies and procedures that sit right across the organisation. So I think there's been some really valuable learning for GCC as a corporate organisation. as a result of those audit recommendations that will benefit the whole county council and should give audit and governance committee members the confidence that, you know, due diligence has been applied and the assurance process that's now in place across the county council stands up to significant scrutiny and rigour. And just to give a detailed snapshot of where we are following the last improvement board meeting, which is the date at which this report was produced, we've since completed further work. Out of those 124 actions, we have 8 outstanding recommendations to address. One of those will be carried forward to be managed through our portfolio management office, and will take a little bit longer because it's to do with procurement or the review of the provision of uniform for staff within fire and rescue, and it needs to go through part of the cultural change process and then an appropriate procurement process. So it needs removing from the improvement board activity and placing as business as usual to come through the normal governance channels. The remaining 7, there is one of those 7 that is related to software provision and requires some training to support its implementation. So unfortunately, we probably won't be in a position to sign that off at the next improvement board on the 16th of April. But the remaining 6 are being taken forward for consideration by improvement board on the 16th of April. So as Payesh rightly says, this is probably the penultimate report. And other than the one recommendation that will become business as usual under the portfolio management office, the remainder will have been closed down almost by the next improvement board meeting on the 16th of April, and certainly by audit and governance committee in July. And I think that's a fantastic achievement for the organisation. It's fantastic for ARA to, you know, undertake so many audits and get them get a department within the county council to then work diligently through, as Councillor Norman's identified, the pressure from HMI, CFRS, which we have had to push back against a little bit in the last review to say, no, you don't understand that these are a legal requirement or a legislative requirement under various pieces of local government legislation to address these audit findings. And I think we've done so. So in closing, I'd just, you know, I'd like to say a massive thanks to my staff and the teams that have picked up the detailed work that's required to be done, both within fire, but then also with the support of Paul and Paul's team in strategic finance and Payesh's team, particularly within audit risk and assurance. And I wouldn't normally do this, but I am going to single out a member of staff who has been absolutely phenomenal in terms of supporting individual recommendation owners and some very senior managers and leaders across the county council as well. And it's an individual who's effectively undertaking the role of a programme administrator and keeping us on track and designing systems and process to help us understand where we are. A lady called Gillian Hickman, who is actually from the temporary register as a temporary member of staff, and has very, very diligently kept a very tight focus on the improvement board process. She's helped us improve it along the way. And she's diligently chased around outstanding actions in areas that she's been completely unfamiliar with right across the county council. And I think without that focus and determination, it would have taken longer to get where we've got to. So massive effort by a lot of people, but I'd particularly like to commend, you know, Gillian's actions to the Audit and Governance Committee and thank Payesh and his team and Paul and his team for the support and getting to where we've got to so far. I'm happy to take questions, Chair.
Thank you, Wayne, and congratulations on your new appointment. I hope that Royal Berkshire Fire Service has got lots of problems, because if they don't, then they're wasting your abilities. Colin had his hand up. You have a question.
Yes, Chair. And I'm looking through the report, and I would want to say that the amount of work that the fire service has done in or improving on all of those policies and procedures has been really good and absolutely necessary. But the bit that I didn't see too clearly, and this is the question, is how the culture has changed, because there were a number of things that went wrong with a previous chief fire officer, which brought attention to the service as a whole. And actually had, sorry, I need to be a bit careful, but you know, the policies and procedures, if people have the right attitude and the right culture, almost can be put to one side. You need the culture right to make sure that you have a good organisation, and then problems don't occur. And I think there were a number of other issues to do with culture that were brought up in that early stage. And it would be really good to know how that culture is changing. And there are ways of looking at that. There are bits in here where you can sort of see where there might be improvements, like sickness absence and other indicators. But it would be really nice to know that the culture of the organisation, the whole feel of the organisation from everyone that works in it is better. And I suppose COVID, in a strange way, may help because people pull together in a crisis. But yeah, my question is, has the culture changed?
I respond, Chair?
Chair,
yes, you may.
A few words before.
Councillor Norman, please.
I'll say a few words before the chief obviously comes in and backs up what I'm going to say with more fact. I understand where Councillor Hay is coming from, but the point that I want to make, having been involved myself in 40 years in public service, where there have been lots of issues in lots of organisations about cultural behaviours and actions of individuals. Gloucestershire Fire and Rescue Service isn't the only and will not be the only one that's had cultural problems. Yes, we did have significant issues at the time of the departure of the previous chief and the principal officer team. But what I want to say to Councillor Hay is you cannot change a culture overnight. It's a process that has to be developed, and it has to involve all of the members of that organisation to go on that journey with you. And there's no doubt, and it was recognised by HMI to me verbally and has been put into writing, that there have been some significant improvements in the cultural journey of GFRS. I knew it was never going to change in 12 months or 24 months. I knew, and I believe other people sitting around this virtual table understand the fact that to change a culture of an organisation takes years. I would be concerned if there wasn't signs of improvement, signs of engagement, signs of staff actually feeling valued and wanted to be involved in the process. And I can clearly say that that is happening, but it hasn't finished. It will go on, and I'll allow the chief to put the icing on my cake.
Please.
Thank you, Councillor Norman and Chair. I think a slight challenge, Councillor Hay, to the points around the processes that sit behind the culture. I don't think you can look at good governance and culture in isolation, and they're certainly not mutually exclusive. And I think for various reasons, one of which I've mentioned, notwithstanding the legal requirement to address formal audit recommendations within a local authority setting, I genuinely believe that a positive culture is built from good and sound governance. And whilst a positive culture, can exist, I think it is often challenged if it's not based on those foundations of good governance. And I think what the audit recommendations have focused us clearly on is laying those solid foundations of good governance. And then importantly, as we've seen with a follow-up audit into one of the areas we've already made some changes to recently, is then quality assuring that you're actually embedding those principles of good governance. And I'm confident that we're not getting it right everywhere, but we are drastically improved from where we were. And it's great that we've got the consultancy approach from ARA to come in and help us to continue on that journey of implementing good governance, which we've done. The feedback I get from around culture, and I fully support what Councillor Norman said, this is a 3 to 5 year journey around culture, and some of it is difficult to measure. And I'm pleased to say that we presented an improvement strategy to a 3-year improvement strategy to the corporate leadership team last week, and we're starting on the journey of implementing that. And that strategy has a heavy focus on cultural improvement and cultural development. But we haven't stood still and waited for the introduction of the 3-year strategy. We've introduced new policies and procedures around progression and development to make sure processes are fair, transparent, inclusive. We make sure we have underrepresented staff groups on interview panels now, so that we can ensure that we are aware of things like unconscious bias and that they are driven out of processes, and processes are fair and transparent. And the amount of staff engagement we do is phenomenal in terms of communication. And I think there are ways that we need to improve that. And HMI CFRS recognised that recently. There are some things that we could have done better in terms of developing our cultural action plan. But again, the difference from 2 years ago to now in the way we communicate with staff, and I think that's the harder measures there are our sickness levels are improved, our absence levels are improved. Some of that could be due to COVID and the way we've developed a COVID secure workplace, and also the change in focus in that fire and rescue staff have been really quite desperate and very willing to support the overall response to COVID. And I think therefore their presence in the workplace has been impacted positively by that. But I suppose anecdotally then, to back that up, the feedback that I get from staff is that it feels like a different place to work. The trust in leadership is improving and increasing. People do feel that they can challenge and are listened to. So all of those are really positive indicators. But again, there's a long way to go. We know we have issues with pockets of bullying, harassment. We are still getting challenged around issues of racism, misogyny, and I know I am absolutely committed to driving that out of GCC, never mind just Fire and Rescue Service. And I also know that Mark Priest, the Deputy Chief Fire Officer who's taking over when I move on to Royal Berkshire, is equally committed and leads on equality, diversity, inclusion for the service. So my response is positive direction of travel built on solid foundations, but it is a long journey and it needs a clear and continued focus over the next 3 to 5 years.
Thank you very much.
If I just come back, Nigel?
No, I think we'll move on. Sean's has his hand up for quite some time.
Sorry, Nigel, if I just may, I think both speakers thought I was being critical. I was saying how the report could.
Sorry, we've touched on the subject. You've raised your question. You've had an answer. Sean has had his hand up for some time, so I'm going to ask Sean Parsons to continue, please.
Thank you very much. Mine isn't so much asking a question as a comment. Wayne, you often say good governance. I'm going to replace that by good leadership, because I think this is what has come across to me, and you brought it out in the report, and I think we noticed this very early on, that there was a tremendous lot of the members of the fire service have been very loyal, a lot of them been there a very long time, of course. But there's an old maxim, which is there's no such thing as a bad soldier, there's only a bad officer. And I think that you've actually proven, sorry, not that you're the bad officer, quite the opposite, that where the leadership is there, where everything else is there, then lots of other things follow. And and that is the most noticeable, and you did touch on it just now, is that how you brought out the best, and we saw that, we've seen that very much in this in the last 12 months or so, which so I think we're all very grateful to you. And I don't think, to be honest with you, it's a journey of 3 or 5 years. I think this journey goes on for all the time. All right, the things which need improving, but it requires good leadership. So thank you very much. And I think and Dave, thank you for all the support which you've given Wayne, and also to the fire service.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you also to Councillor Norman for frequently attending this committee to kind of be a midwife to the improvements taking place. That's been much appreciated. Thank you, and good luck from us on this committee. Good luck to you, Wayne, in your new enterprise. Well done, and thank you. Rob, we now move to item 10, the LGA Model Code of Conduct. So can you tell us what you're planning with this, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So just to remind the committee, first of all, that back in 2019, the Committee on Standards in Public Life recommended that the Local Government Association should develop a model code of conduct for local authorities. Since that date, they've spent a lot of time consulting with members and officers across all tiers of local government and have produced from that consultation the document that's included in your packs. One of the main areas of debate over that period has been whether such a code of conduct should go with a high-level statement of principles approach or a more detailed behaviour-based model. You'll be aware that our current code of conduct follows the former rather than the latter. It's a short statement based on the Nolan principles rather than detailed. The verdict of that discussion was that the LGA has opted for the latter approach, a more detailed code of conduct, and the main reason for that being that that the consensus was that offers members a greater degree of clarity, so that you can be more clear about what behaviour is expected of you, and for the public, considering whether to put in a complaint under the code of conduct or not. It also offers clearer guidance on what acceptable and unacceptable behaviour looks like, and in doing so avoids frivolous or unnecessary complaints occurring. We're under no obligation as a council to adopt that model code of conduct. It remains our decision to set our own code of conduct, and we don't yet know what the approach of the majority of councils across England will be. In Gloucestershire, a mixed approach is emerging. So Cotswold District Council has already adopted the model code. Cheltenham are considering it, but are likely to modify elements of it. And Gloucester City, having recently reviewed its code, doesn't intend to adopt it at the moment. However, having spoken to my monitoring officer colleagues in the districts, there was general agreement that there would be benefit if we could converge towards a more consistent code of conduct between ourselves and the district councils, so that even if we got to the point where our codes weren't identical, they were at least similar. And the advantages of that would be clearly that, first of all, it's clearer to the public, who only have to understand one code rather than the current 7. It's consistent for those of you that wear 2 hats and are both district and county councillors. And it's also more efficient for those district councils that share legal and monitoring officer resources. So as a result, I think there would be an appetite amongst the 7 councils for moving towards a common code, and for certainly entering into discussions to do that. This committee is responsible for advising the county council on the code and revisions to it. So I'm asking for your views on that approach, in particular, whether the committee would support the development of a common Gloucestershire code before I embark down that route and enter into discussions with my monitoring officer colleagues to that effect. So really looking for your views as a committee as to whether that's the direction that we should be going in.
Rob, do you want comments now?
That would be helpful. Yeah, thank you.
Just sort of general comments. If people have got views about this, I mean, generally speaking, 7 into 1 won't go. So you might have a difficult task on your hands. But let's see what people think about a common code. I know Stephen,
Hurst,
we haven't heard from
Kay.
Stephen. Stephen Hurst, please, first.
Thank you, Chair. I certainly do believe that there are great advantages to have a common code of conduct between the county council and the district councils. There's no point in having different ones because that only complicates the implementation of a code, and really implementation should be simple and straightforward, and that can be achieved by a common code of conduct. And of course, also then, if there is a common code of conduct between the county and the districts, then you can move that further down towards the parish and town councils. So what we should hopefully end up with is one common code of conduct throughout the county's different levels of council and governance. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. It's a good point about the parish councils. Colin.
Thank you, Chair. I think it would be better to have a common code of practice. However, your comment is that it could take a bit of time to do that. And I would rather us have, actually state that we're looking for a common code of practice across Gloucestershire, but in the interim, this is our code, whatever we decide that is, so that there's a clear indication that that's where we want it to go, and it may be that it will be modified shortly. The other thing I just wanted to ask the question, and once you start tinkering with it, I understand, there's no stopping. But particularly with the focus there's been in this last year on Black Lives Matters and the kind of misogyny that you have, the nearest phrase I see is that I will treat all persons fairly and with respect, which is fine, and it means the same thing. But I wonder whether, given the fact that discrimination in various forms has been highlighted, that we could possibly use discrimination or without judgment. I don't know. It's something to think about, because I think it's particularly important at this moment in time. And I think most councillors would want to kind of agree to that.
I think you're quite right, Councillor. You're starting a discussion, I think, that will run and run. Is there anybody else who wishes to support? Yes, John, support the general principle.
Thank you, Chair. As a parish councillor, I welcome this code, and I agree with Councillor Hurst that a uniform code of conduct across all tiers of local government would be a good idea. We have seen on social media that some parish councils in particular can get very out of hand, and I think a unified, nationally recognised code would go some way to bringing perhaps some peace and quiet to parish councils. At least I would hope so. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Gravels also has his hand up.
Just very quickly, Chair, I'd agree with Steve. I think that Rob's a very persuasive guy, and he'll have no trouble persuading our colleagues in the districts and the parishes to agree to and sign up to a common code of conduct. I don't share Colin Hayes' pessimism whatsoever. And given that we know that Rob's going to be handling this, I'd say go for the joined up common one, and good luck, Rob. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Councillor Parsons.
Very quick point to say that the number of parishes in my patch have already adopted the code. So I hope you don't start changing it, because once they adopt, people will get fed up if too many changes come to it. So I mean, yes, and I'm all in favour of having a single code. Thank you.
Yes, I hope, having adopted the LGA code doesn't mean it's impossible for councils to then subsequently adopt a unified GCC code. But yeah, it could be a little bit turbulent. Okay, the general view is that. Am I going to give you the right of reply, Colin? Are you going to leave us on a positive note at the end of this committee meeting?
Oh, I'll try to. One of the other, I'm quite happy, because I think the code is pretty good. I just wanted to mention that, but about discrimination. One other thing I wanted to mention, and it can't be in the code of conduct for councillors, but I do hope that close by is how members of the public should treat their councillors. Now, we may be used to a bit of abuse and being told that, we're all liars or whatever, but particularly with social media, some of that can be extremely intrusive, it can be violent, it can be very nasty, and the way in which it affects different people at different times in their life is really significant. And I do think that close by is, what councillors should or shouldn't put up with, if you see what I mean, from members of the public. We're open to criticism, but some of the abuse is a different matter.
I think that's a pertinent point, and it is. If you pay attention to social media, it is sometimes very uncomfortable. And if there are allegations of misconduct, of course, the other thing is, and I've seen this in my former profession, once the allegation has been logged, people start to draw conclusions which may well be completely unwarranted. And I've noticed that often people don't get any kind of support. An allegation having been levelled at somebody in public life, they don't get any support during that period before eventually they are completely exculpated. So there are issues around that. I do agree, but how you put that into a code, I've no idea. So Rob, I think we have a fairly good endorsement of your proposal for a unified code. So thank you very much for that. I think this brings us to the end of the meeting. We have a date for the next meeting. I can't remember when that is, though. What's that, Andy? Do you know? I'm
sorry, Nigel. I don't have.
We don't know. We don't know, and indeed, I suppose a new council could determine things differently. Yes, that's perfectly true. Can I thank you, Andy, for your clerking and minuting and general support for the time that I've been chair of this committee. I've appreciated that very much, and I'd like to thank the members of the committee for their contributions. I think you have a very fine brigade of officers in this county, particularly on the financial side of things, and that is, as far as I can recall, has always been the case, and that's immensely helpful. I would like just to mention somebody whose death I do regret, and that is Roger Wilson. He was on this committee for a while, and I really appreciated his liveliness, even his volatility, and I think he'd have had some sympathy for some of the things that I was saying today. But well, thank you very much. I've enjoyed the committee. It's been interesting and challenging, yeah, I wish you well in the future. But I think to make an impact, you're going to have to fight a bit. That's what I will say. You're going to have to fight a bit. So. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing it, Nigel.
Thank you. Okay.
Yes, the same. Thank you, Nigel.